Got disowned by my wealthy family for being the poor, useless kid. Spent years grinding in silence. Just bought their foreclosed mansion at auction when they went bankrupt. The look on their faces when they showed up begging and realized I was the new owner was priceless. Karma's a bitch, and today, she's wearing my designer shoes. The dining room felt like a stage, and I was the unwilling performer in a play where everyone knew their lines except me. Crystal glasses caught the light from a chandelier, scattering sharp reflections across the polished mahogany table. The air smelled of rosemary and roasted meat, a perfect family dinner. If only we were a perfect family. I pushed my food around my plate, my appetite gone. My stomach churned with something heavier than hunger. Tonight was the night. After months of working double shifts, after countless rejected scholarship applications, after lying awake staring at the water stains on my bedroom ceiling, tonight I would ask. My fingers tightened around my fork. Across from me, Lila, my younger sister, was describing her latest shopping spree. And then Dad just handed me his credit card and said, "Get whatever you want." Can you believe it? She giggled, twirling a strand of her professionally highlighted hair. Daniel, my older brother, smirked. Must be nice. I just got a text from the dean. They're nominating me for the Rhodes Scholarship. Mom gasped, her manicured hand flying to her chest. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. Dad clapped him on the back, pride glowing in his eyes. That's my boy. I swallowed hard. This was my opening. I got accepted to State University. I blurted. The table went quiet. Mom's smile didn't fade. It just froze like she'd been told a joke she didn't quite get. Oh, that's nice, honey. Dad took a slow sip of wine. State, huh? My palms were sweating. Yeah, but I need help with tuition. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Daniel snorted. State? Seriously? Lila rolled her eyes. Ew, isn't that like a safety school? Mom sighed, setting down her fork with deliberate care. Sweetheart, we talked about this. You need to be realistic. Realistic. The word burned. I'm being realistic, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I've been working 2 jobs. I've saved up some, but I just need a little help to cover the rest. Alone, even, I'll pay it back. Dad's laugh was sharp, humorless. Alone? With what? Your minimum wage paycheck. The condescension in his voice made my face heat. I'm trying my best. Your best isn't good enough, he said flatly. The words hit like a physical blow. Mom reached over to pat my hand, her touch cold. We just want what's best for you, sweetheart. Maybe community college? Or trade school. You've always been good with your hands. Daniel smirked. Yeah, maybe you could be like a plumber or something. Lila giggled. I stared at them, my family, and something inside me cracked open. You think this is funny? My voice shook. You'll throw thousands at Lila's shopping sprees and Daniel's private tutors, but when I ask for one thing, Dad slammed his fist on the table. Silverware jumped. Enough. You don't get to stand there and act like we owe you anything. Oh me. I choked out. I'm your child. Mom's lips thinned. You're an adult now, and adults handle their own problems. The injustice of it all burned in my throat. You've never treated me like one of them. Never. Daniel leaned back, crossing his arms. Maybe because you're not on our level. Lila wrinkled her nose. You're so dramatic. I looked at my father, searching for something, anything, in his face. But his eyes were cold. Get out, he said. The words didn't register at first. What? You heard me. He stood, towering over me. If you're so ungrateful, you can leave. Tonight. Mom didn't protest. She just dabbed her mouth with her napkin, like this was a minor inconvenience. My breath came too fast. This wasn't happening. But then Lila sighed, twirling her hair again. Finally, can we eat in peace now? And just like that, I snapped. I shoved back from the table, so hard my chair toppled over. You're disgusting, I spat. All of you. Dad's face darkened. Watch your mouth. Or what? You'll kick me out. I let out a bitter laugh. Don't worry. I'm gone. I stormed upstairs, my vision blurring. My room, the one I'd had since I was 5, felt foreign now. The posters on the walls, the worn-out desk, the closet full of hand-me-downs. None of it was really mine. Not in their eyes. I yanked my suitcase from under the bed and started throwing clothes into it. Jeans, a few shirts, my old sneakers. I didn't bother folding anything. A knock at the door. Mom stood there, arms crossed. You're really doing this? I didn't stop packing. You made the choice for me. She sighed. You'll be back. You can't survive out there on your own. I zipped the suitcase shut with a sharp yank. Watch me. I brushed past her, my shoulder knocking into hers. She didn't reach for me. Downstairs, the dining room was alive with conversation again, like nothing had happened. Like I had never been there at all. I walked out without a word. The front door clicked shut behind me, the sound final. The night air was cold. I didn't look back. But I made a promise to myself, right then and there. Someday, they'll regret this. Someday, I'll make sure of it. The wheels of my suitcase caught in a sidewalk crack as I stumbled forward, the sound of my parents' front door slamming shut still ringing in my ears. The night air smelled like rain and exhaust, so different from the lavender-scented linen closets of the house I'd just been banished from. I walked without direction, each step taking me further from everything familiar, my breath coming in ragged gasps that fogged in the chilly air. Memories flooded my mind like poison, each one more painful than the last. I remember my 8th birthday, when Dad had forgotten to come home from work altogether. Mom had thrown together a last-minute cake, while Lila pouted about not being the center of attention. When I'd blown out the candles alone in the kitchen after everyone had wandered off, the wax had dripped onto the store-bought frosting like tears. At 12, I'd made the varsity soccer team, the only freshman to do so. When I'd shown Dad the letter, he'd barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Your brother made captain," he'd said, as if that was the only response required. That night at dinner, they toasted Daniel's latest academic achievement with expensive champagne while my soccer letter sat forgotten on the counter, slowly absorbing a water ring from someone's glass. The summer I turned 16, while Lila was at tennis camp and Daniel was doing that prestigious internship at Dad's firm, I'd worked 30 hours a week at the grocery store. Every paycheck had gone into the family account because that's what responsible kids do. When I'd asked for just $20 to go to the movies with friends, Mom had sighed like I'd requested kidney. "We're saving for Daniel's college, you know that." A car horn blared, jerking me back to the present. I realized I'd wandered into the middle of a crosswalk without noticing. The driver leaned out his window, shouting obscenities I barely registered. My fingers were numb where they gripped the suitcase handle, but the cold was nothing compared to the ice that had settled in my chest. I found myself outside the 24-hour diner where I'd sometimes gone after closing shifts at the grocery store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I slid into a cracked vinyl booth, my suitcase wedged awkwardly beside me. The waitress, Marjorie, her name tag said, took one look at my face and wordlessly brought coffee. The heat of the mug scalded my palms, but I welcomed the pain. It was something real, something I could focus on besides the hurricane of memories tearing through my mind. The coffee tasted bitter and cheap, so different from the imported beans Dad insisted on. I drank it anyway, feeling the liquid burn all the way down. Through the streaked window, I watched the occasional car pass by, their headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Where were they all going? Home to families who actually wanted them? A group of laughing college students tumbled into the booth across from me, their cheeks flushed from some party. One of the girls caught my eye and smiled sympathetically before turning back to her friends. The normalcy of their interaction made something ache deep in my chest. Had my family ever looked at me like that? With anything resembling actual affection? I thought about Christmases where my gifts were clearly last-minute afterthoughts while Lila's piles reached halfway up the tree. About school events where my parents' seats remained conspicuously empty. About the 1,000 tiny cuts of neglect that had left me bleeding long before tonight's final blow. Marjorie refilled my coffee without asking. "Rough night, hon," she murmured. I opened my mouth to answer, but all that came out was a choked sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. She patted my shoulder and moved on, knowing better than a press. The diner clock ticked past 2 a.m. I should have been thinking about where to sleep, how to survive, what to do next. But all I could focus on was the terrible, freeing realization settling over me like a shroud. They'd never loved me. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Oh, they'd performed the motions when it was convenient. The obligatory birthday card signed with rushed signatures. The parent-teacher conferences where they'd nodded along without really listening. The Christmas photos where I'd been positioned at the edge so I could easily be cropped out later. But love? Real love? That didn't make you feel like a ghost in your own home. That didn't condition every scrap of affection on what you could provide or how little space you took up. That didn't end the moment you became inconvenient. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, the first hints of dawn lightened the sky. Somewhere in the city, my family was probably sleeping soundly in their expensive beds, already forgetting about the daughter they discarded like yesterday's trash. I left a $5 bill on the table, my last $5 as it happened, and stepped back out into the morning. The air smelled like wet pavement and possibility. My suitcase wheels rattled over the uneven sidewalk, but my steps were steadier now. That's when I made my second vow of the night. Not in the white-hot rage of the moment, but with cold, clear certainty that settled into my bones. I would survive this. More than survive, I would thrive. I would build something they could never take away. And when the day came that they realized what they'd thrown away, I would be just as merciless as they had been. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I walked out of my parents' house with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. 5 years of sleeping on couches, working 2 jobs, swallowing my pride. 5 years of grinding until my hands bled and my bones ached, all for one purpose. Never again. And now, as I sat in the back of Sleep Town car, scrolling through the bankruptcy notice on my phone, I realized the day had finally come. The auction house was colder than I expected. Marble floors echoed under my designer heels as I walked through the lobby, my tailored coat whispering against my thighs. No one looked twice at me. Just another wealthy investor here to pick over the carcass of some failed family's estate. The irony wasn't lost on me. I took a seat in the back, watching as the auctioneer droned on about lot numbers and minimum bids. My fingers tapped idly against the armrest, the diamond on my left hand catching the light. Then, lot 47, the Kensington estate. 7 bedrooms, 6.5 baths, original hardwood throughout. My childhood home. The room blurred for a second. That foyer was where I'd scrape my knee learning to ride a bike. That kitchen was where I'd burned my first batch of cookies. That winding staircase was where I'd sat, night after night, waiting for a father who never came home from work on time. Now I was being sold to the highest bidder. And I intended to be that bidder. The auctioneer started the bidding at $1.2 million. A pittance really for a house in that neighborhood. But the market had crashed, and apparently, so had my parents' finances. A man in a cheap suit raised his paddle. $1.2 million. I waited. $1.3 million, called a woman near the front. The bids climbed slowly, lazily. No one was particularly invested, just investors looking for a flip. Then I lifted my paddle. $2 million. Heads turned. The auctioneer blinked. Ma'am, did you say? $2 million. Cash. The room went silent. The gavel came down. Sold. Just like that, the house was mine. The paperwork took less time than I expected. I'd used a shell company, of course. Blackthorn Holdings, so my name wouldn't appear anywhere. Let them wonder who'd bought it. Let them sweat. My lawyer handed me the keys with a raised eyebrow. You sure you don't want to see it first? I smiled. Oh, I've seen it before. The movers had just finished clearing out the last of my parents' belongings when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. There they stood, all 4 of them. Dad's suit was rumpled, his hair grayer than I remembered. Mom's designer sunglasses couldn't hide the puffiness around her eyes. Daniel's arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped scowl. And Lila looked like she'd been crying. I took a deep breath. Then I opened the door. For a second, no one spoke. Then, my father breathed. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Me? Mom's hand flew to her mouth. What? How? I bought it, I said simply. At auction, when you couldn't pay your debts. Daniel stepped forward, his face reddening. You bitch. I laughed. Now, is that any way to talk to your new landlord? Lila's eyes filled with fresh tears. You can't do this. Oh, I can. I straightened, meeting my father's gaze head on. Funny, isn't it? 5 years ago, you told me I'd never amount to anything. And now, I gestured to the house behind me. Look at me now. Dad's jaw worked silently. For the first time in my life, he had nothing to say. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single key, the one to the guest cottage out back. I tossed it at his feet. You can stay there. 1 month. After that, I smiled sweetly. I suggest you start packing. Then I closed the door in their stunned faces. The lock clicked. And for the first time in years, I was home. 3 days passed before they knocked on my door again. I knew it would happen eventually. People like my family didn't just accept defeat. They wheedled, they negotiated, they manipulated. And sure enough, as I sat in the formal living room, my living room now, sipping espresso from the same china set my mother used to guard like a museum piece, the tentative rapping came. Tap, tap, tap. Like mice scratching at the walls. I took my time answering. When I finally opened the door, the sight almost made me laugh. There they stood, my once impeccable father in wrinkled slacks, my mother's manicure chipped, Daniel's designer stubble grown and unevenly. Only Lila still looked put together, though her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "Come to beg?" I asked pleasantly. Dad's jaw tightened. "We've come to talk." I stepped aside. "By all means." The silence in the sitting room was thick enough to choke on. Mom perched on the edge of the sofa like she expected it to bite her. Her fingers kept twitching toward the antique side tables. Her side tables, as if she couldn't believe they weren't hers anymore. Daniel broke first. "This is bullshit." He glared at me. "You're really going to just, what? Kick us out?" I crossed my legs, letting my silk robe fall open just enough to show the Louboutins beneath. That was the deal, wasn't it? 1 month in the guest house. "You can't do this to family," Mom whispered. The word family landed like a grenade. I set my cup down with deliberate care. "Funny, I seem to recall you doing exactly this to me." Dad leaned forward, his voice dropping into the tone he used for business negotiations. "Listen, we've had our differences, but..." "Differences?" I laughed. "You threw me out with nothing." Lila sniffled. "We didn't think you'd actually leave." That, more than anything, made my blood freeze. "You didn't think I'd leave," I repeated slowly. "So what? It was just a game to you? See how far you could push me before I broke." Mom had the decency to look ashamed. Dad didn't. "You always were too sensitive," he muttered. I stood abruptly. "Get out." Daniel scoffed. "Oh, now who's throwing people out? Get out." My voice didn't rise, but something in it made even Dad flinch. "The guest house is yours until the end of the month. After that," I smiled, "I suggest you start Googling homeless shelters." Lila burst into tears. "You're monstrous." I walked to the door and held it open. "No, sweetheart, I'm just your daughter." They left, of course. But not before Mom turned in the doorway, her eyes glistening. "We're blood," she said hoarsely. I met her gaze without blinking. "Blood washes off." The latch clicked shut behind them. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall. The moving truck arrived at dawn. I watched from my bedroom window. The bedroom window, the one I used to press my nose against as a child, watching for headlights that never came home early as my family loaded the last of their things into a rented van. No limousines this time. No private movers. Just Dad and Daniel heaving boxes with strained silence. Mom sniffling into a tissue, Lila staring daggers at the house like it had betrayed her. I should have felt something. Triumph. Pity. Something. All I felt was tired. I met them at the front gate. Dad froze when he saw me, a banker's box of golf trophies balanced in his arms. Up close, I could see the new lines around his eyes, the way his collar gaped loose around his thinning neck. "You happy now?" he rasped. I considered the question. Not particularly. That threw him. His brow furrowed. Then why? Because it was never about happiness. The morning breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass from my lawn. It was about fairness. Mom stepped forward then, her Chanel handbag, last season, I noticed, clutched like a life preserver. "We're sorry, okay? Is that what you want to hear?" The apology hung between us, flimsy as tissue paper. I shook my head. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry it cost you." Lila made a choked noise. "When did you become so cold?" A bird sang somewhere in the oak tree, the one I'd fallen out of when I was 7, breaking my arm. Dad had been too busy on a conference call to drive me to the ER. "I learned from the best," I said simply. Daniel slammed the van door shut. "Fuck this. We don't need her." For once, I agreed with him. They left as quietly as rich people ever do, with squealing tires and one middle finger from Lila's window. I stood there long after the taillights disappeared, the rising sun warming my back. The house loomed behind me, silent and waiting. My house now. Every memory here was a wound, every room a battlefield. I could burn it to the ground. Or, I turned and walked inside, my heels clicking against the marble foyer. Up the stairs, past the family portraits I hadn't bothered taking down. Into my bedroom, not the cramped one they'd given me, but the master suite.